All right. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Unhooked. I am so excited to have my dear friend Cole Chance on. Cole, when I started this podcast, you were actually one of the first people I thought of when I was thinking of bringing people on, because I know that we're just going to geek out on everything addiction and recovery and Buddhism and yoga and all the good stuff. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I would love to just kind of jump straight into the deep end, the juicy deep end,
Mhm.
and just hear a little bit about, where did your story with addiction begin?
Where it began, let's see, where it began in the middle America, in Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. And I guess in a nutshell here, I feel like I was an only child with pretty extroverted, introverted parents. I read a lot. I played sports, but pretty happy childhood. I don't remember a lot of it, but it was like I mean, it was pretty good, and, I always remember feeling, like, pretty confident. Nothing, like, too much to report, I guess. And
Yeah.
then in, like, 7th grade, there were all these, like, little 1st through 6th grade. That's kinda how the elementary schools went in the States, and then in 7th grade, all of these schools came together, and all of a sudden, there was, like, 500 7th graders in one class. And this probably correlates with hormones happening and da da da. And I just remember like all for the first time ever, I remember feeling like I could see hierarchy. It's like all of a sudden I could see that there were cool kids and there were not cool kids. And there were like the goths and the punks and the preps and the da 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 da. And I just it's like my paradigm just really shifted and I didn't really know how to deal with it, but I knew, like, I wanted to be part of this group, not part of this group. It's like I had to start thinking and seeing the world in a
Mm,
different way. I just still remember walking down the halls of 7th grade, and I got anxiety, and I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what anxiety was. I just knew that, like, all of a sudden I didn't feel, like myself. So some people I could easily talk to, some people, like, I would want to talk to, the cool kids I would want to talk to, and, like, literally nothing would come out of my mouth, and then I would hate myself for it, and only thing I'd want to do is, like, the next day is, like, say something, and, like, it was a big deal. I mean, it feels so silly to say that now, but it was such a big deal. It was, like, debilitating, and, I remember then kind of around this time casually trying, some pot, which was fun, but then one night we tried a little bit of booze, and this was like my life turned into Technicolor, and I didn't know that it had been black and white.
mm,
So, there was a difference in it just, like, relieving some of the anxiety. All of a sudden, it was like I all of a sudden, I started to live,
mm,
and I felt like I filled myself out, like, I filled my skin out, like I was bigger than myself. I was, like, bigger than me and,
mm,
like, could say what I wanted to say. I could express myself. I was funny. I was, like, no inhibitions, and everything was just, like, lock and key. And I remember laying in my friend's pool, just so clear. We had, like, an inner tube and, I was in an inner tube and I had my legs crossed and I was, like, swirling my leg. When you do this in an inner tube, you just spin, and I was looking up at the stars, spinning in this inner tube, and I told myself, like, "I'm gonna do this forever."
this is the
Like,
solution.
this
This is
is
it.
this oh my god, like, what is everybody in the world doing? I spent, like, a long many year a whole like, a long time later being like, why is everybody not just why are we not all partying the whole time?" So, anyway, I just attested that I was going to do this forever, and that's what I tried.
Mm,
So that was the very beginning is I think that it filled a hole in some probably, possibly normal social anxiety, I don't know.
Mhm.
I wasn't talking about it with anyone. Anyone wanted to talk about it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so I was on my way. Like that, anything, it was just like, well, whose brother is gonna get us booze? Like, let's start exploring this. Like, oh my God, like kid in a candy shop. Like, I just was so excited. And then, so started drinking here and as much as we could here and there, testing it out. And then I got a cool older boyfriend. So I was about 14, probably got a cool older boyfriend and started sneaking out of the house. And like they had a keg at their house. They lived on the wrong side of town. I was in Christian, Oklahoma. He was a black boy that literally lived on the other side of the train tracks.
Mhm.
Like, and one night we had sex um down like the dirt road from my house. And I just remember the adrenaline of sneaking out of the house too. I have to mention that. Like how much adrenaline. I could still
Mhm.
like imagine this house and imagine like the route that I would take and like turn on this fan, turn on the air condition, all these little things that make a little bit of noise. And like my whole route, I can still remember that. So it was very exciting. And then he'd page me. Oh, so
Uh-huh.
exciting. But anyway, we have sex and I got pregnant the first fucking time we had sex.
Wow.
14,
Wow.
by black older boy in Christian like pretty segregated, pretty racist Oklahoma.
Mm.
Um, so boom, there
Wow.
was the big trauma. Whole school finds out. So remember this school that I'm very concerned about being cool in. All of a sudden I'm teen pregnant. And then I just kind of black out, I think, for a little bit.
Mm.
I was recently in a holotropic breathwork session, and I had this vision in my session of this shock, and the shock was of me realizing that I was pregnant.
Mm.
And I remember this I didn't know exactly what it was when it was happening in the session, but it was just like all of a sudden, it was all of a sudden like this, like, oh my God, it was just like choking me. And then there was this sense of rage. And I was able to identify that there was a part of me that sensed that I was, this little girl, like, oh my God. Okay, first shock. And then there was a part of me that was like, protect her. And in my vision, this like came, sounds like woo woo, but from in breath work, like I had this sense of like it was like a puma or a jaguar or something. Anyway, what it was the birth of my anger came
Mm.
alive out of a protection for this part of me,
Mm.
this this part of me that was just like, "Get all the weapons you can, we're going to war." And I just like talons went out in me in real life from that point, and I was
Mm.
like, "Get away from me, walk off." Like I hated everybody all of a sudden, and,
Mm.
um, and I was like, "Oh, I'm bad? I'll show you bad. I'll show
Mm.
you bad." But in this recent birthwork session, I felt the impetus or like the beginning of that, the birth of that rage and anger, which really
Wow.
fueled a lot of my addiction. Pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
Wow. What happened
Hmm.
next?
So after that, you know, essentially what happened probably when that rage came out is that I was 14, I couldn't process shit, and I couldn't
Yeah.
process shame that came along with it, and the shame was too much to swallow, so I got mad.
Yeah.
And I
Uh-huh.
decided I was gonna hate my mom. I was not gonna ever, like I couldn't look them in the eyes. I couldn't even look them in the eyes because I was shameful, but I just acted because I hated them.
Right, right.
And I had an abortion. My dad took me, very against my mom, couldn't stomach it,
Mm.
and there were protesters everywhere, picketing fences.
Wow.
Yeah, it was intense. And I
So
kind of had to
very,
shut off.
yeah, very traumatic experience at 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then we moved states, we moved to Missouri. So then it's, of course, I absorbed that my parents are embarrassed of me when probably they're trying to give me a fresh start, like,
Mm,
um, so then
mm,
immediately, we get to this new school and, just to say I was already going to be an alcoholic. Like, it's interesting because it wasn't that, but I was already like, "I'm gonna do this forever," and then that came in, and then it was
mm.
like, we're rolling
Right,
in this
right.
now. But whenever we got ooh, greater cool, I'm starting doing bird watching. I'm identifying this bird that just flew by. Very
For those of
exciting.
you listening at home,
Uh,
so just to give some backstory, Cole is in Bali, sitting in Ubud in the most magical place in the world on a deck overlooking some jungle, and probably has seen the most rare bird in the world just fly by. So,
pretty
yeah, just to give
exciting.
some
And only
context.
recently only recently know what it's called. So, that's very
Right,
exciting for
right.
me.
So you're geeking out on bird watching.
Just to anyone who's listening, like, you might think you'll never fill the hole, but you will. And
Yeah.
that means
Long
more
story
fun than I
short,
thought.
addiction sucks, but it gets better. Yeah.
Yeah, you get your kicks with bird watching one day. No, just kidding, I'm kidding. You may, but yeah. Anyway, um,
So the kind of the alcohol you had experienced it, this magical elixir of life that solved all your problems, and then you started
mhm,
dealing with trauma, anger, rage,
mhm,
isolation, all the emotions you didn't know how to deal with, and
yeah.
so alcohol was kind of the obvious solution for that.
Oh, it's excellent. It's a great
Yeah.
idea. It's a great idea, and, how we can, like, sniff each other out some way, like, somehow you just know. So I moved to this new school and immediately find the party kids, and
Mm,
immediately am sneaking out of the house and, you know, getting stuff at school, da 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 da. So the whole thing goes down there, and then we have to move again, because I've, created
mm,
caused havoc here. I ended up going to, like, my first little rehab there, which was, actually, like, pretty cool when I look back at it. It's like a wilderness rehab. It was called Seuss. It's when they take you out into the middle of nowhere, and they make you learn all these survival skills and, like, hike around
mm,
and, like, learn how to, like, build a fire with sticks and all of this stuff. I hated it. But in hindsight, like, really, I wish I was into it when I was there. But that
yeah,
was, like, the first time that parents kinda shipped me off. They didn't know what to do with me. And
yeah.
then they sent me to another place where my dad's best friend was the principal, which ended up being this place called Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. I don't know, some people may know what that is, and it's essentially notorious party town, and my parents are, like, so naive, they have no clue.
Mm,
There, I find, I had been drinking pot, acid, mushrooms, more like that, but then now I move here and there's, lots of money, lots of
mm,
older men, cocaine, and ecstasy, so these are very exciting things.
mm,
So then it blows up even more. I
mhm.
move out of the house, da 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 da, start dating dealers, so you can just imagine how this goes. So it just really revved up very quick, and my tolerance was very high very quick because
Yeah.
I decide that, I strategize and decide, like, I'm very young, and I'm proving myself. Looking back on this whole thing, it's always so much about belonging, and I'm wanting to still belong like I was.
Mm,
And I'm to belong in these scenes, these big party scenes, older people, money. I needed to have a high tolerance and I needed to, appear a certain way. And I really prided myself in the amount of drugs and alcohol that I could consume and stick with it,
mhm.
which is hard on the body
Yeah.
and it requires maintenance.
What do you mean?
When a tolerance gets very high, then I have to continue to feed it or
Mm,
else withdrawal begins to come. So very quickly.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So the more that my body becomes used to having a certain amount of substance in it, I have to keep feeding that
right.
substance. Mhm.
So it sounds like kind of a very quick downward spiral that you were finding yourself in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was a daily drinker from quite young, and I was a
Mhm.
morning drinker quite young, which also felt when I realized that I could choose to drink in the mornings, it felt like another, like, golden ticket moment, like the one when I first
Mm.
drank apple, like, many
Like
years
a
several years later.
epiphany moment, like, "Oh my god, I can do this in the morning too? This is amazing."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just
because
for context, how old were you at this time? This was, like, early 20s or
yeah, I was probably when this was probably, like, 18, 19 whenever I had been at when
okay.
I'm living in this place. Then I spend the next many years moving to resort towns. So I live ski resort in Vail or Steamboat or somewhere in the winter, and then I do a summer resort in the summer. So I get to move geographic locations a lot, and I'm in
Mhm.
party towns all the time. So everything's really normalized. Bloody Marys in the morning, beers on the ski lift, like not a big deal. So I got to hide in that manner a lot,
Mhm.
and didn't stand out as much. And they're party towns, and we just partied hard, but
Mhm.
I was still, drinking starting, to drink in the morning. I started shaking in the mornings, and I started feeling kind of depressed, and I was like, "What could this be? I'm gonna stop drinking coffee." I gave up coffee. I gave up coffee at one point, and then I was like, "I wanna put some vodka in my orange juice," and this was, like, the first time that I didn't do it, like, with other people. Normally it's like, "Who wants a beer?" or "Who wants a Bloody Mary?"
Mhm.
And I start kind of hiding it from my partner who is, like, an alcoholic too. That's when you know that there's a
Mhm.
problem, you're, like, hiding it from people who are, like, massive drinkers. And then I just didn't shake anymore, and I actually felt
Mhm.
great. So anytime, I wake up in the morning and there would be the hangover or withdrawal starting, I just realized, "Oh, I just popped this in. Here we go again." So I could run with
Mm.
that for a really long time.
So it was just kind of a constant state of drunkenness almost. Like you just kinda needed to keep
Yeah.
filling it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
What
I
were
bartended. As I got
uh
older, I bartended, and I always worked in bars, so I could drink at work. I could add kegs and Jaeger machines at home. Like, I mean, it was all the time everywhere. And because my
yeah.
tolerance was so high, I wasn't sloppy. I could be talking to you like I would be wasted right now, but talking to you like this
Mm.
because I practiced it so much.
Mhm. Just living life in kind of a gray fuzz of drunkenness, but not sloppiness. What were did you have, like, a rock bottom moment where the shit hit the fan or where you kinda had a
Mm.
wake up call?
Yeah, I actually had many. I would have many kind of rock bottoms, and I would end up in treatment.
Mm.
Normally, like, I would finally raise a flag. Somebody would come on a rescue mission across the country to pick me up. My family would send me to expensive rehabs. So several times that had happened. Um, but I never, like, wanted to get sober. Like, I didn't want
Mhm.
to get sober. I wanted to find first, I wanted to feel better. I wanted to stop the pain. I knew they were gonna give me drugs, benzos, to stop it. But then as soon as I started feeling better, I started to strategize again of, like, how can I do this right? How
Mhm.
can I, drink right? Be like a normal drinker. Inevitably, that would not work and it would crash and burn again. And then something dramatic and colorful would happen, and I would be in jail, or I would have a seizure at my grandmother's funeral, or you would have
That's a real
a
story?
that's a real story. I
Yeah.
had a seizure from withdrawing.
Wow.
Not good.
Yeah.
And talking about denial, which is something I like to talk about a lot in my story, but see that episode of having the seizure was normally a seizure will happen about 3 days out from drinking. If you stop or severely reduce the amount of alcohol you're putting in your system, then you can get a grand mal seizure, and I had it that
Mm.
day. And so I was in the hospital for about a week. It was bad. It was a really bad
Mhm.
one. I don't remember it, but anyway, everybody knew that I was an alcoholic. I'd already been in and out of rehabs a lot, but, in the hospital, the doctor, they're telling me it's alcohol. And, like, I look up on Google and I find where it says, like, 0.001% of people have grand mal seizures due to stress, and I'm like, "My grandmother just died. Get off my back," you
Mm.
know?
So you were very, cunning and kind of, you were smart about it. You found ways to deceive yourself and
Yeah.
stay in denial. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of that. Lots of that. Um, in the very end, I mean, the story just looped, and there were just many, many severe, very severe bad rock bottoms, I would say. But I was stubborn, more
Yeah.
stubborn than most. And the very end, the last one, though, um, I had recently checked myself out of detox with this handsome Lebanese heroin addict, and we went on like a 3-month bender in Austin where I started shooting heroin, which was new. I'd
Mm,
done it in many other ways, but I hadn't shot it. And that took me pretty quick. And we were shooting like cocaine and heroin, speedballs. And I was like hanging out at this crack house compound in Austin, Texas. I remember I'll share this just because I think it's kind of powerful. When I first started doing all of this, it was quite glamorous. I think I mentioned that town with, like, the cocaine and the ecstasy, and there's yachts, and there's parties, and it's,
mm,
like, clubs, and I'm young and beautiful, and, like, it was this exuberance that I loved. Like, I still
yeah.
today, when I look back and I'm not being super honest with myself, I'll have nostalgia of myself, like, like, my leg kicked back, a champagne glass, my pinky out. It's like this, like, flapper. "I'm just fabulous, darling." And like, God, it's such a lie, but that was there. But the next day
Mhm.
I'd be like shaking and vomiting and, doing
Mm,
searching through doing anything I could do to get a little bit more of whatever it is I needed. But this glamour is I wanted so mad. And in the end, I'm at this crack house on the bad side of town with some rough stuff going on. There's a
mm,
bunch of kids running around, there's prostitution coming in and out. There's just some racket going on,
mm,
and, I was laying on this bed next to this girl who was very young, and everybody was waiting for someone to get back with all of this, whatever it is that we were getting, and, it was just a hectic scene, and I remember looking up, laying on this bed next to this young girl, and there was, like, a mirror on the ceiling, and I'm laying next to her. She looked like she was probably 15 or 16, and I just, like, all of a sudden was like, "What the fuck?" And
mm,
just thinking about her, this being about the same age, I was a bit younger than her, and just thinking like, I have came so far, like so far from this glamour. And people arguing, like a boyfriend arguing with his girlfriend to go have sex with somebody so they can get some more like uh, while they're bouncing the baby on the knee. Like, I don't know. It was just like such a scene. Like,
mm.
I needed that thick scene.
Yeah.
And not long after this, somewhere around in that buzz and that haze, I had an overdose or a stroke, or I don't know really what happened, but I remember I was standing and I had a speedball and my knees just crumpled. And I do remember my knees crumpling and I was saying, there's something wrong. But my words were coming out like,
Mm,
and then I was out and I came back to, I don't know how much longer and everyone was gone. I'd just been left there. And, I hitchhiked to the other end of Austin, which was very, very challenging because I had just, like, electrocuted my brain. And I remember trying to get across I-35, which was, like, the busiest highway there. It was, like, in August in Austin, and I couldn't turn my poor head because I had just, like, electrocuted myself. So I'd have to, like, turn my whole body, like, to see who was coming and then, like, turn back around and try to, like, frog across it. Like, it was debilitating. Somehow I
uh-huh.
made it back to this room that I was renting from, like, some old crabby Mexican man. I don't know how I ever found this room or what I was doing, and it was across from a liquor store. And what I normally do when I hit a bottom, so this is maybe not a bottom, this is like, yeah, it's a bottom. Is I went and bought a bunch of booze with whatever money I had left, and I had some pills, and I was going to go and it's gonna take me a while. Like, I knew it was gonna take me a few days of just nursing myself back. And that's how I was gonna nurse my that's how I took care of myself, was with alcohol and pills. And, nothing was happening. And I would take some more pills and drink some more, and, like, nothing was happening. Like, there was no relief that was happening.
Mm.
And I started freaking out. At this point, I had already cut ties with no one would talk to me anymore. I've lied to all my friends. I'd been kicked out of my sober living place. I had broke out of detox with the lover. Like, parents had long stopped talking to me. Um, and I called that sober living place that I lived at, and I had made, kind of friends with the owner, but I got kicked out of there because 'cause I'd hidden alcohol all over the place, and people were trying to get sober, and I was, like, hiding shit everywhere.
Mm.
When I called her and I said, "Please, please, I don't have any money. Like, I need help. I need help." And there was one in all of Austin, there's one sober living house that takes people that are high risk, which means sober living normally only takes people out of rehab. They normally just don't take someone off the street. And so they were the only house that did that, and they only had one room that they gave away for free. And they had no reason to give it to me because they had just kicked me out for, like, driving up on their lawn with my car, like, hammered. And they let me back in, and she said it was because you've never asked for help anymore. You're like, "You're notorious for never saying that there's a problem."
Mm.
And I had to wait, like, 3 days, I think. They said, "Come on a Wednesday," and I showed up on a Tuesday night, and I said, "I will sleep on your couch." That always gives me butterflies. It gives me goosebumps. And she just opened the door and moved out of the way, and I walked in, and it was like,
Mm.
and in that shitty little sober living place, I fucking stopped. That was the end of it.
Mm.
I don't think I could have done it without it, actually. I didn't end up getting sober out of rehab. I ended up detoxing myself in, this little spot in West Austin, South Austin. And I think there's something to do with I was in there with other people who didn't want to be there either, but we were in there together. And, I haven't thought about this before, but, like, it wasn't what I wanted, but I belonged there.
Mm. What made the difference? Like, there's this, you mentioned the denial earlier, and it's a common theme in recovery that you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. But it
Mhm.
sounds like something shifted this time where you were ready for it. And I'm just curious, what was it that changed on this one?
This one, I think I actually realized that I was going to die. And
Mm.
this had happened for a while that everybody had been telling me, like, "You're going to die." Like, I was going to the hospital with, like, glowing, like, 0.55s and shit where it was like, the doctors were saying the only reason you're alive is because 'cause you're an alcoholic. Like, your tolerance actually is keeping you alive. Like, I would people would be dead. I was in risky situations all the time. My parents, they stopped talking to me because every time the phone rang, they were just like, "This is it. This is the last one." And I just didn't believe
Mm.
in anyone. I just thought everyone, like, "Get chill out." Like, I actually just
Mm.
didn't believe anyone. That everyone's like, "This you are so advanced," with whatever reason there was for it, whether it be a doctor or whether it be, whatever. I just thought that everyone was over exaggerating. And so I needed this that had never happened to me before, and it scared me.
Mm.
Whether, again,
Yeah.
not sure, stroke, overdose, what it was, but it scared me. And, oh, I didn't tell this part of the story, it not working, whenever I was trying to drink and it wasn't working, this is what changed. This is what it was, is that I remember in AA rooms, which I was in and out forever because I was always court ordered or rehab ordered or something, and those little cliches that they always say, one thing that they say is that one day it's not gonna work anymore. And I heard that one day it's not gonna work anymore. And I was like, one day it's not gonna work anymore. And, I think what they mean by that is like one day, like the bullshit's not gonna work anymore, or your solution's not gonna work anymore. But I literally thought at that moment, like, one day it's not gonna work anymore. Like, you're gonna drink and it's not gonna do what you want it to do, which is true. But probably what happened is because I had like just had a stroke or something, and booze wasn't bringing me down the way that it normally did. For whatever reason, it wasn't working the way I wanted it to work, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, I've reached the point to where it doesn't work anymore."
Mm.
And this is the only thing I knew. Like, if this doesn't work, I'm fucked.
Mm.
And another thing came to my mind, and this is I had been to a rehab recently where I had just asked like a tech. I was just talking with somebody who I kind of connected with, and I wasn't planning on getting sober, but I was just asking her, I'm like, seriously though, like, how did you do it? Like, because couldn't even compute. I couldn't even begin to imagine anyone wanting to, for one, much less like actually doing it. And she just goes, baby, one day you're going to realize that you can be high or you can be happy, and that the two may have used to go together. They're not going to go together. And
Mm.
then, and that came into my head too in that shitty little room. I was like sweating up a storm in this bed. That came into mind too. You can be high or you can be happy. And I was just like,
Mm.
and that's when I made the phone call.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So while I do believe that you cannot burst the bubble of somebody in denial. I was talking this about someone the other day. It's like somebody's in the denial. It's like they're in this bubble. And sometimes often the bubble's really thick and you're just fucking wasting your breath. And sometimes the bubble gets thinner and they can hear a little bit more.
Mhm.
It's like, sometimes we're in the bubble, sometimes other people are in the bubble. Like, but that at that moment, my bubble was very, very thin. And something that had been told to me before that someone didn't think it was a waste of words came back,
Mm.
and I heard it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you hear those things that have been said when you're not in a receptive state, but you remember it and it comes back to you when you actually can hear it. Yeah. I love that your story it's like all these little moments that are chipping away at the kind of the statue that you have of this is going to work forever. I can just keep drinking my problems away. And you have these little snippets, what really struck me is that moment where you're in the crack house, kind of like laying next to this girl, looking at, the two of you on the mirror, and just that the visual aspect of that, of seeing this younger girl and seeing how far you've fallen and just
Mhm.
how kind of stark that can be of a wake up call. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I was
yeah.
29. I was 29 at that time. And yeah, that moment was quite pivotal, especially when you're in the depths of it, which I was. A lot of times it was very
Mm,
blurry to like that was a moment of like real thin bubble,
yeah.
real thin bubble. And I was like, and moments like that make you want to make the bubble thicker as well, and that's an
Yeah.
issue with denial is that it loops, and then sometimes you see a little bit and you're like, "Oh, I'm not ready for that." Because many
Right.
times in my life, that it ebbs and flows. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm in trouble," and then I just didn't wanna deal with that, so I would drink it away.
Yeah. Yeah. The pain of seeing the reality of your situation just makes you want to act out more to escape the pain of seeing that. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. So, okay, I want to shift into kind of, it's like the hero's journey. It's like, okay, you went through this horrible thing and then you got to rehab and you were finally ready for it.
Mhm.
Um, what, you know, what are the components of recovery to you? Like, what is it that actually helped? Once you were ready for it and once you kind of checked in and you're like, "Okay, I'm here." What were the things that allowed you to build a foundation of recovery?
So I actually didn't go to rehab in the end. I went to a sober living.
Oh, right. Okay.
Rehab actually wouldn't let me back in. They said I'd been like 8 times. I
Mhm.
actually tried to get into a rehab and they wouldn't take me. They said, "There's nothing we can do for her."
Mhm.
I had that reputation. Um, so sober living, rehab is great. Like if somebody is ready and they go to rehab, it's great, but I actually didn't get sober in rehab. So sober living, one, I think community is I couldn't have done it if I was just renting an apartment by myself. Like, I
Mhm.
needed to know that there wasn't booze in there. I needed to not be able to just walk out and go to the store and get some booze. I needed to have a breathalyzer. I needed to have all of that. Um, I was untrustworthy to myself. Like, I needed
Yeah.
all of those boundaries, and I think that like, kind of fierce compassion in that way was, like, I needed to stand up to myself for myself, and I actually couldn't do that alone.
Just kind of the
And
accountability of the community, like,
yeah,
holding you to those standards. Yeah.
yeah. So I really, really needed that, and I'm really pro sober living if you can find a proper spot because there's a lot of problems with them, which is a side note. Um, so that was really powerful, and just the community in general. Like I was going to AA in the beginning. I found the Austin Zen Center, which had refuge recovery meetings, which was more my style. But also was going to AA, and that was just important to be able to sit in a room with somebody and to share yourself without them being like, "What the fuck?" Because I could say things that I couldn't say to normal people. Like, there's stuff that's said in AA rooms or in recovery rooms that you just can't, like, say to your average person. People be like, "What? Like, this is horrible." But you can say it and people are just like, "Yep." Like,
Yeah.
that is a salve and a tonic for human connection.
100%.
That's
Ooh,
belong
it's
again.
totally one of the things that I see, so this podcast is all about porn addiction, and one of the most healing things for so many men is just understanding that there are other people out there,
Mhm.
because addiction, and particularly some of the kind of the sexual addictions, porn addiction being one of them, it's so isolating. You feel like you're the only one, and you feel like you're a monster in a sea of normal people, and that no one would understand. And when you finally get people coming together and saying, "Yeah, I'm struggling with this," and you can just see the relief coming onto people's faces when they recognize that they're not alone, and that kind of common humanity of recognizing you're not broken, you're not a
Mhm.
monster, you're not alone. Um, I genuinely think it's one of the most important steps
Yeah.
in recovery. Yeah.
Absolutely. I absolutely, absolutely agree. And I run recovery programs now, and it's kind of cool. I would love to do them more in person, but when I get to do them on Zoom, I can see everybody's faces, like at the same time. And I'll hear one
Yeah.
person talking and I can watch other people's faces and they're like, and not in like a, oh my God, they're like, they're speaking my story out of their mouth, you know?
Yeah.
And then everyone always goes, I had no idea. I had no idea. And it's alchemy, like, truly, to be able to feel like I mean, that's the magic. I mean, that really is that's the medicine. The other stuff come around and support it, but that's what it is. It's reframing and reshaping the stories that we tell about ourselves, the lies that we
Mhm.
believe about ourselves whenever we see ourselves in other people. Whenever that it pulls that thread, it calls bullshit. If someone says, "Hey,
Mhm.
me too," then you can't believe your bullshit anymore, that you're the only person.
Mm. Yeah.
So, just
Yeah.
powerful, powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another really big component for me was speaking because I started to go to yoga crazy. In one of the many rehabs that I went to, I took yoga for the first time. And I knew right then yoga, and she taught a lot with a Buddhist bent, and she was a heroin
Yeah.
addict. And I remember it was this was in Santa Cruz. I
Oh,
remember it
no way.
was
I'm actually from
beautiful.
Santa Cruz.
How are you? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I lived there for a couple years at one point.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and very fuzzy couple years, very fuzzy couple years. Um, so I went to a rehab called The Camp, which is out of Santa
Uh,
Cruz a little bit, and they had this beautiful, like, greenhouse that we did yoga in, and I remember that I got there and I was detoxing and, like, my room wasn't ready yet, so they, like, let me go and lay on my yoga mat in this. Shouldn't have. I wasn't supposed to be in there really yet, so I'm in there and I'm, like, sweating and shaking, and I can smell myself. It was horrible, and I'm in this gorgeous place, and it's like the birds are chirping and they're like cartoon birds, like everything is so beautiful. I just remember how beautiful everything was while I
mhm,
like horrible. And this teacher like had an angel's voice and she was talking about, I don't know what she was talking about, some beautiful something. And she was like, I'm a recovering heroin addict. And I remember being like looking at her, like I was trying to like, and I was like, bullshit. Like I didn't believe her. But anyway,
uh,
throughout the whole program, she was really that was the first time I'd ever done yoga. And I remember, like, looking into Buddhism and, like, reading about, like, the Eightfold Path, and I'm like, they're reading somewhere I'm not supposed to drink and da 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 da. But I just remember being like, "If I ever get sober," which I'm not, like, both of those voices happened in my head. "If I ever get sober, but I'm not, then I'm gonna look into this yoga and Buddhism thing." But I,
mm,
like, shelved that for, like, many years. I drank on the plane home, like, I was out, um,
yeah,
but I always kept it, so I was kinda going to yoga, starting to dibble into, like, some different books and stuff, like Pema books and, uh
mm.
more for show, probably, um, but when
But
I
you were
finally
starting to fill your backpack with, like, these little snippets of
yes,
wisdom that you could use later. Like,
yes,
you weren't really using them, but they were in your backpack, and
they were in my
maybe a
backpack.
few years later, you kinda like, "Oh, yeah, that eightfold path thing actually kinda
Mhm,
sounds helpful." Yeah.
and I started very slowly. If I was, like, a little bit above line or even at line, I would, like, go to a yoga class.
Mm,
So I started kind of going to yoga when I could. Sometimes it was long times in between. Sometimes, here and there, I'd still be, probably had a wine bottle in my bag or in my water bottle. Like I always had wine in my Nalgene. Um, but I was like starting to go and I was starting to like watch how people live. I remember listening to these two girls in like the changing room and they were like, "Do you want to go get tea after class?" And I was like, "Tea date." Ask someone for
like an alien kind of, like, observing humans, like, how do these people live? Like,
totally.
"Oh, okay, tea date, that's something I should try to mimic."
Absolutely. I felt like a total imposter. But,
Yeah.
when I get sober, I, did took like a 30 days for $30 or something like that, and, just started going to yoga every day. And
Mm,
it was so beneficial, and I remember sharing with my group that it was towards the end, I think. I don't know where I shared this, I can't remember now, but at some point I shared with people that I was, in recovery. And that was the first time that I had shared that with anybody outside of, like, an AA meeting or something, and, it was, like, a really big move for me because 'cause I'd spent a lot of time lying
mm,
about it, and I would relapse just because somebody offered me a drink, and I didn't want to. I was like, uh, okay." Like, I couldn't say, "No, I don't drink." Like, it was wasn't
mhm,
vernacular. So being able to share about it openly was massive,
mm,
yeah, massive. And like to share it with I eventually take a yoga teacher training and I share it there. And I just start to get a little bit more confident. I was working at a restaurant, I shared it there. And far from people being like, who is this freak? That they started asking me questions and people started saying,
yeah,
hey, talking about them or talking about their partner. And just the more I was able to share, the more empowered I became about being able to say, I don't drink. Like, I can
yeah,
do lots of things.
yeah,
I just don't drink.
right.
That's really big.
It's so interesting, I feel such a resonance with this part of the story. Also, it took me so long to own up to having a porn addiction. You
Mhm.
know, the thought of telling anyone that I even watched porn, let alone had, kind of an addictive relationship with it was so It was so shameful. It was so embarrassing. It was like, I don't want to talk about it. I just want to like shove it
Mhm.
under the rug and, you know, lock my door and like not let anyone see. And I remember the first time I told someone, it was when I was in grad school. It was another PhD student, and he and I were in like the Buddhist meditation club. And I don't know what it was, but I kind of told him, I was like, yeah, what got me into meditation was porn addiction. And that was the first person I could ever tell. And that was even 6 years after I had gotten kind of sober from porn. So I
Wow.
wasn't even in my addiction anymore, but there was so much shame about it
Mm.
that it was just so hard to open up and
Mhm.
let people in. But
Mm.
what was interesting is just like you, the more that I've opened up about it, I mean, now it's nothing. Now I can just say like, "Oh yeah, I used to be a porn addict." And it's empowering
Yeah.
because the thought is when you're in the addiction, you think if I tell somebody, they're going to think I'm a monster.
Mhm.
They're going to judge me. They're going to all this stuff. And then you tell people and they're just like, oh, yeah, wow, that must be really tough. And it's this, again, it's that mountain coming off where you're like, oh, okay, I'm not a monster. I'm not alone. Other
Mhm.
people deal with this. Um,
Isn't
so I
that
love that aspect.
that other people feel this too, or other people feel this too? Like, that's something that's just so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you, yeah, for 6 years still held that. Yeah, for 6 years still held it. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big.
So we've got community in terms of like the important aspects for your recovery, community, and then speaking about it, kind
Yeah.
of being vulnerable, opening up about it. And I know, yoga is a huge part of your recovery journey. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more like what is it about yoga that helps with recovery?
I think there's different components, and I've always kind of been like, "What is this magic spell? Like, why is this working?" And it's really, I think that there's many components to it. I think one for me, especially when I was still using, for me to gather myself and get to a yoga studio and unroll a mat and to get on it, it's a pretty big deal. And
Mm,
I lived a very loud life. It was very chaotic. And then when I'm quiet with myself on a mat, it was like it was me and me. It's like I wasn't hiding from
uh-huh.
myself. And I was lucky to have some really good teachers that would always be offering. It wasn't just like a fitness class. It was like there's always be self inquiry. And I'd always be like,
Yeah. They're like, they're speaking just for me. They knew I needed to hear this message.
which, you think I would get the hint of like, oh, this is a human thing, not like,
Yeah.
how do they know? Anyway.
Yeah.
So that was big, just being able to have a space where it was me and me, and it wasn't like, "Oh, that felt good." Sometimes it was like, "Fuck, I'm in so much trouble. Fuck, I'm in so much trouble," and I would just, like, cry in child's pose.
Yeah.
It's an hour that I wasn't drinking, like, honestly, hour by hour was big.
Yeah.
And then, but then farther along, I think that, we create so much disconnection in our body, which is interesting in my case because if you remember the beginning of my story, it's like I was after the connection. Like I felt disconnected first. I felt disconnected before I started drinking. Drinking was like superwoman,
Mm,
like I was connected, and that was a lie. And it lasted for
mm,
a while, and then it just disintegrated, and it went the other way. And I was so disconnected.
mm,
And I've always been pretty body based. Like I've always played sports. I was always very in my body, but that had all went away. So just like right hand to your left leg, it's like, wow. Just really well, stop it.
this is
Like,
wild.
yes,
Right hand to left leg. Whoa.
I
That's
know,
cool.
in your body. So just there, just being able to connect and to notice your breath. Never thought
Mm,
about that before. Hadn't thought about that before. Like, oh, just little things. And the
yeah.
farther I get away, not thinking that then, but the farther I get away and, like, learn more about the nervous system and trauma and all of this is that I really think I always did a vinyasa style of yoga, which is it's breath initiated movement. And I think it was the breath. I think a big component of the soothing aspect of me leaving class
Mm,
feeling calm is that I just spent an hour inhaling and exhaling at a steady pace.
mhm. Yeah.
We don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hold my breath all the time now. I notice I'm like on my coffee, I'm answering my emails. I just go and get on my mat and practice, and I naturally inhale and exhale. I
Right.
inhale and I exhale and I inhale and I exhale. It's like it sets my metronome. So
Yeah.
that's a
And
big.
it's like a nervous system reset, just that
Mhm.
kind of soothing,
Yeah.
like regulating aspect of yoga and meditation. The fact that it kind of just calms your nervous system
Mhm.
and regulates you a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's the breath. And Deshkachar, one of the, the old OG yogis used to say that you know, the asana is just decoration for the breath. And
Mm,
I really believe that.
wow.
And it's just a way that we remember to inhale. Lift your arms up, you inhale. Put them down, you exhale. Keep going. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, the poses are great. It's fun. It's fun to feel physical and feel alive in your body. The endorphins, all of that is good. But
Yeah.
your breath, your nervous system does not speak words. It speaks breath.
Yeah. I love what you're bringing in because it sounds like yoga, and it's true, that there's so many little ways that it supports recovery. Like you mentioned in the beginning, just having the discipline to go to a yoga class and kind
Mhm.
of the self-confidence that that brings of, hey, look, like I'm doing something that's good for myself.
Yeah.
That already is like a support of saying, oh, okay, I can do difficult things. I
Mhm.
can nurture myself. um, the time with yourself, the self-awareness that that
Mhm.
brings, just having some time to be with your own thoughts, even
Mhm.
if it's difficult, rather than the chaos of getting lost in
Mhm.
distraction. And then also like the movement, the physical aspect of how beneficial exercise is, and then the breath. It's funny because there's so many ways that these things support our recovery, but they're all intertwined also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all intertwined. And then you meet community there. It
Mm,
begins to feel, there's really, yeah, there's a lot there. And then whenever you go deeper, you go past the asana, you begin to look at the philosophy, and hopefully teachers
mm,
that are putting are weaving that through, and begin to, it's a self inquiry.
mm,
What does, how do you treat yourself? How are you speaking to yourself? What's the proclivity of your mind? What
yeah.
is, there's a zillion different, ways to go with it. And then that brings you to something else. And then that brings you to something else. And that,
Yeah.
that, yeah, the self inquiry, the self discovery, just allowing the curiosity to build, especially coming from somewhere where you're so like this. Like, I never thought that I would not be always thinking about how to get something, how to get more of something, how to not smell like it, how to be sure that nobody knew, how to get rid of the bottles, how to not make them clank in my purse, how to not, where did I leave my car? Like, whatever. What lie
Yeah.
did I tell? It was all consuming. There was no opportunity for me
Yeah.
to think about anything else. So I eventually come into this practice where I'm getting curious about my breath. I had space for that. But then slowly I do, and then, curiosity as well being a component of ventral, which is the part of our nervous system that is cool, calm, and collected. We can't be curious when we're in hyperarousal. We can't be curious when we're hyper stressed. So that as well, just curiosity allows us to dip our toes into, calm, you know,
Yeah.
people, and then as that builds, whether it's, check in with your breath, or whether it's like, how do you treat your pain? Or how often do you tell the truth, or, whatever the inquiry is. It Curiosity, being able to listen and ask and answer those questions, that in itself bring us into a calm state. Like, it all works together.
Totally. It's one of the biggest tools that I have for people when when they're getting hooked or hijacked by a state of lust. A lot of the
Yeah.
work around porn addiction is like, okay, what do I do when I'm triggered? When I'm in this state of like wanting to act out? And curiosity, because just as you said, it's so beautiful. You can't be in a state of curiosity and simultaneously in a state of like craving or, lust or whatever it is that you're in one of these unhealthy kind of mindsets. And
Yeah.
curiosity, the moment you drop into genuine curiosity, like, what does this feel like?
Mhm.
Well, what is this? And what's going on in my body? It's just an immediate kind of unhooking from that train that's taking you nowhere good, you know?
Yeah,
So
absolutely,
I love that. Yeah.
absolutely. Have you heard of the 8 C's in IFS?
No.
This is similar to, like, polyvagal theory or internal family systems. Dick Schwartz says the 8 C's to bring you into self energy, which is essentially like the same as like ventral energy with polyvagal theory. It's like curiosity, calmness, confidence, compassion, creativity, um, connectedness, and courage, I think. But these are all these little things
Yeah.
that kind of identified as helpful to remember that can help you bring you back. They're all signs of that state, but they can also help
Yeah.
bring you back into it if you realize that you're out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like feeling frenetic, and I'm like, okay, can I do something creative? Can I dance? Can I draw something?
Yeah.
Can I get curious? Can I connect with somebody? But anyway, those are just some nice little pillars like to remember.
Yeah. And I love that all these 8 C's, they're all this is something that you kind of mentioned also, but there's so much like joy and happiness and like ways of living that are just beautiful. And when you're stuck in your addiction, you think that acting out when you're addiction, like drinking, doing drugs, looking at porn, is gonna bring you happiness. And that's just kind of the paradigm you live in. And, a big shift for me was realizing like, oh, just, you know, having a lot more pleasure wasn't actually bringing me the fulfillment that I wanted. And there's all these other things like connection, curiosity, compassion, contentment, all these things that actually make you feel it's like what you're really looking for.
Yeah.
And when you're stuck in that addiction, you don't know that there's this whole other world of things of inner peace and inner joy and inner fulfillment. You just think, well, my happiness has to come with just more pleasure and more distraction and more excitement, but it doesn't
Mhm.
work.
Mm-mm. No, no, there's no sustainability. There's no sustainability,
Yeah.
but so hard. It's like, what are you not seeing because you're seeing what you're seeing? It's like, how do you shift? It's like,
Yeah.
this is what I'm looking at. Like, how do I know something I don't have language for? Like, that's how I really felt. It's like,
Yeah.
uh, looking back on it, people ask me sometimes, like, what would have worked? And I'm like, I don't think anything. Like, I don't know. No one could have just like said something to me. Like, I'd been told everything. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think that there was anything that like could have shifted. It's like how my paradigm needed to be rattled enough
Yeah.
I could see from a different angle because I was stuck seeing the only thing that I was seeing, and I didn't have any language for anything else. Even if you told me
Yeah.
what it looked like over here, I was like, it didn't compute. I wasn't like actively looking at it and saying, "Nah, stay here." It's like I didn't even like realize
Yeah.
it didn't make any sense. I thought recovery was gonna be horrible. Oh my god. Oh, I so
Yeah.
didn't. I so so didn't want it.
Like, "Oh, look at these boring people that don't have any fun." Like, it's
Bird
gonna be
watching.
horrible.
I'm over there bird
Yeah.
watching. But it's like you
Yeah.
don't
Well,
know
and
what you
it's
know, and
yeah,
oof.
and our society sells us the opposite, our society tells us, like, "Hey, go to clubs, get drunk, have parties, live kind of a rock star life, and that will make you happy." And then we look at people who are sitting in bird watching, and we think, "Those losers, they don't know what's up." And then you experience it, and you're like, "Oh, wait, this is actually way more fulfilling and feels way better." And it's just hard because there's so many forces that are pushing us in the other direction.
Oh, so much. Yeah, so much. It's really against the stream. Like, you're really having to
Yeah,
go stream of not only, like, culture and the stories that we've been sold, the stories that we've told ourselves, but also against our wiring,
our
our
physiology, our
evolutionary wiring.
evolutionary biology, totally.
It's
I mean,
not
this
really
is
set up for us. It's set up
not at
for it's
all.
what it does, at what it was
Yeah.
designed to do, but unfortunately, it's not designed to.
right. Our survival mechanisms for tens of thousands or millions of years have been move towards pleasure
Yeah.
and run away from anything unpleasant.
Yep.
And that's, for me, what I love so much about like Vipassana practice and why the Buddhist kind of path really spoke to me was I recognized that so much of my strategy for life when I was stuck in my addiction was just more pleasure all the time
Mhm.
and run away from pain. Like just whenever pain is there, run away from it. And whenever you see something pleasant, grab a hold of it and just try to, I was addicted to junk food, porn, video games, all the kind of
Mhm. I
goofy
do.
stuff that young boys are into. Yeah.
Mhm.
And what's so beautiful to me about Vipassana practice, and this is true in kind of all the spiritual traditions, it's like this practice of being with things as they are. It's like, can you be with unpleasant? Can you experience boredom? And instead of running away to your phone, can you just be like, oh, this is boredom. It's
Mm.
not pleasant, but it's okay. It's like I don't need to run away from this. Um, or can you experience something pleasurable? Like, can you see something pleasurable without chasing after it and just say, oh, that's pleasurable, but I don't need to run after it. I don't need to grasp it. And there's so much peace in that, just not chasing after pleasant all the time.
Absolutely, and I think but I th
Yeah.
I think for me, what allowed me to sit with that and to accept that was to realize that because there was pain, because there was unpleasant, didn't mean there was anything wrong,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I associated anything unpleasant with wrong. This is
Mhm.
wrong. I'm wrong. The world is wrong. You're wrong. Everything is wrong. So there needs to be a solution. But really to be like, to really understand of like this is an age part of life and you're not doing anything wrong because it hurts sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? It's like, oh, oh. Like what if there wasn't a problem right now? What if there was a
Yeah.
problem?
Mhm.
What it was right now. And it's
There's
gonna
there's
change
this,
soon.
there's some meditation teacher, I forget his name. He's in the kind of Advaita tradition, but he's like a modern teacher. And he has this one self-inquiry question that he kinda drops in sometimes to meditations. And I remember like, I'm not super into the Advaita tradition, just doesn't really speak to me that much.
Mhm.
But I remember this question was it's so beautiful, and it's just when you're meditating to drop in this question of what would be here if there was nothing to fix?
Mm, mhm.
And it's just like, yeah, if there's nothing I need to fix, what would be here? And it's like, oh, I don't need to fix because so much of our life is like, I need
Mhm.
to fix this, I need to fix that, and it's
Mhm.
like, hey, what if there wasn't anything to fix? And it's just a shift in perspective that's so liberating.
It's so liberating. I love that. I love that. And yeah, I hear that sometimes. Tara Brooks will throw that in every once in a while. Like, what if
Yeah.
there wasn't a problem? Like, just set it aside just for a second and see what it feels like. And my whole
Yeah.
system, "Hmm,
Yeah.
wow. Like, just imagine
Yeah.
that there wasn't. Just imagine like that thing you're worried about, like you just weren't. Like, it's an option. Just try it on. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
wild.
it's a muscle
And then
we
we
have
were,
to build. It's hard to be with those things that are unpleasant and not fix them.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I hope that we're not making it sound to anyone like it's like that. Yeah, it's
It's
simple,
not
not
just a
easy to
choice like, yeah.
oh, no, no, it's not just a choice, and it's simple, not easy to take another AA cliche. That's so true.
Mm,
But it's a practice of like, oh, you're just continuing to remember, continuing to, return to that it's an option, you
yeah.
know, to stay.
What would
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like if you were to give some not advice, because advice is always um not helpful. What would you think would be helpful for someone starting out on their recovery journey? Like let's say somebody's listening to this and they're dealing with some addiction. Might be porn,
Mhm.
might be junk food. Aside from the things we've said already, is there anything else that you think would be really helpful?
Hmm. the 2 things came to mind. One thing, this quote by Parker Palmer, he says, "We have to learn as many ways as we can to talk to ourselves."
Mm,
And I think that that's really beautiful and really pertinent in terms of finding different ways to engage with yourself, um, like journaling, like, who are you when you're in nature? Who are you when you're in movement? Who are you when you're in stillness? Who are you when you are with community? Like, to find as many ways as you can to explore different avenues of you. Trying new things, putting yourself in a different scenario. It's really important, I think, that we can surprise ourselves
mm,
because it just reminds us that, like, oh, this is so malleable. This whole experience of me is so malleable. So it's so changeable, which I think
yeah.
that is really forgotten. And the other thing is what I normally say is that just to leave room for possibility because there's so much that
Mm,
we're blinded from and not like in a shitty way, but it's like there's so much that I can't see right now. Like I'm excited to know what I'm into in a couple years that I don't even like haven't even heard of yet. Like leave room for possibility. Like I would have sold myself short had somebody asked me, been like, "Tell me your dream. What do you want to do?" I would have so sold myself short. I would it's just I can't believe my life now. Like the space that has opened and the freedom that has um that has been created and cultivated. I wouldn't have had words for. Like I didn't have
mm,
language for it. And so just to leave room to surprise yourself.
mm,
But yeah, it's malleable, it's shiftable, and there's just you can't see the full picture.
mm. Like change is possible
Yeah.
to keep that hope alive that like, oh, like I can do this. And who knows where it leads, but it's something beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Yeah.
also like what you said about making more time, or I guess what Parker Palmer said about making more time to speak to yourself or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
as
because
many
so
ways
much of addiction.
as
Yeah,
many
go for it.
ways as you can of talking to yourself. We must,
Yeah.
many ways as we can. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that is one way of looking at addiction is it's a way of running away from ourselves. It's like anything we can do to run away from ourselves, to
Mm,
escape. Like I don't want to be with myself in this moment. Um, yeah. A question that I like to ask myself, and I'm very curious to ask you is there anything that you've changed your mind about in recovery over the past decade? Like something that you used to really be like, oh yeah, this is what I believe in about recovery, but you've kind of shifted how you feel.
mm. I think that, well, I guess for one, like the disease model, I really believed in the disease model because that's what was taught to me. And then that also made it feel like, oh, good, I have a disease. That was pretty good. Um, to it being, more developmental. Well, I still think it's very, very layered. I think it's very, very layered. I think Gabor Mate says like there's likely a lot of genetic component, but it really doesn't matter because we can't do anything about that piece. You know, the part that we can explore is going to be more historical and environmental and,
Hmm.
that component of it. And that, this was a solution based, it was a intelligently formulated solution based behavior that didn't work out, but it
Hmm.
did.
And
Uh,
it did at some point it worked for a little bit
yeah,
and
that's
it
not
no
sustainable.
longer works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it worked for a time, but everything changes and it doesn't work anymore, and the pattern had been struck.
Hmm.
But that there was intelligence there rather than, having to get over the shame of being an alcoholic than to being like, just that whole paradigm I think has shifted a lot.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that Gabor Mate's work just all of the ways he approaches things, it's so compassionate and it's so human and understanding of just understanding, one of my favorite quotes is when he says, addiction is not the problem. The
Mhm.
addiction was the attempt to solve the problem. And
Yeah.
just really understanding that all of our addictive tendencies, it comes from our inability, or like our past inability to deal with whatever pain was going on. And whatever we reached out to for, as the addiction was a way to kind of soothe ourselves, to deal with that pain
Mhm.
that we didn't know how to deal with. So like for you going way back, it was the anxiety, like social
Mhm.
anxiety as a preteen. And it's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I don't know how to deal with this anxiety, but this alcohol makes me feel better." And it's like so much of recovery in my book is learning how to work with your emotions, how to, heal kind of
Mhm.
the distress that comes when a strong emotion comes and you want to escape that emotion. Like, oh
Mhm.
no, I can sit with my anxiety. I can sit with my lust. And it doesn't mean I'm broken, doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It's just, yeah, it's a,
Mhm.
a response strategy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever, uh, there's kind of two ways to ask this. Either like, do you ever kind of detour off your recovery or slip off your recovery? And then like, how do you find yourself back? Or do you ever notice addictive tendencies cropping up in other areas of your life?
Mhm.
And how do you kind of practice the self-awareness and micro recovery in an area that might not be, about alcohol or drugs? It might be noticing addiction with something else. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, for me, yeah, the way that my addiction shows, my tendencies show up totally. Yeah, they definitely do. Um, I can find it with kind of interesting when you're talking about like, there always being a problem to fix. I can find my mind creating problems to fix often, which I think is really interesting, which just keeps me in a state of craving, which of craving for things to be different than they are. If I
Hmm.
could you know, lose a little bit of weight or put on a little bit of muscle here, lose a little bit of weight here, put on a little bit of muscle here. And sometimes I can get quite honed in on that. So I have to watch that. Sometimes I can get honed in on body image for sure, just in general, different things, different body image things. Um, I can sometimes do it with food and I can do it with work. So those are all different ways. Sometimes what it is like where I'm putting my mental capacity. Like I'm putting a lot of like I'll notice myself like thinking about what I'm eating a lot or like judging it. So I have to really watch that. I'm like, no, this is not a good meal or a bad meal. I don't necessarily
Mm,
have an eating disorder background, but I work with a lot of people who do. So when I notice that, I can just it's internalized bullshit, really.
mhm,
Same with I can internalize then uh sexualization of whether this is a good body or a bad body. Like
mm,
how is my body perceived the cultural sexual norm or whatever. I have to be like, I'm internalizing that. Like, I have to watch that. And then the work thing is that I get a lot of dopamine from I think I get a lot of dopamine from planning.
mm,
And I plan yoga retreats and yoga teacher trainings, and a lot of my work is in the future, getting ready for something. So I
mhm.
can that can really take up a lot of my mental space. So those things can take up a lot of mental space. So I have to watch all of
Yeah,
that. Technology as well has been a big thing of just noticing my thumb. I'm not connected to my thumb. It's like a marionette doll. Like dress it up. Like, why is it keep going back to Instagram like without my consent?
yeah.
Serious thing.
I
So
mean,
whenever
that's one that a lot of our listeners will resonate with, because Instagram, social media addiction is so there's so much overlap with porn addiction and social media addiction and just kind of the compulsive nature of being on
yeah.
the phone, the dopamine hits that it gives us, the sense
Mhm.
of escape. Um, and it's so ingrained in our society.
It's so ingrained, and I think it's really interesting now we would have, like, a broader conversation about addiction, about, like, sex addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction. It's quite colorful. It's more obvious. You know what I mean? Like, it's more obvious to you. mine was more obvious to most people around me, but you go anywhere and everyone's got their phone. Like, we're
Mhm.
all doing it. We're all riding, surfing the same pathways, but a lot of people wanna be like, "No, you have an addiction. That's an addiction," but it's all on the same circuitry. And I heard something the
Yeah.
other day, which I thought was really interesting, reading this book called Stealing Fire. I don't know if you've heard of that from Jamie Wheal.
Sounds sounds familiar. Yeah.
He, anyway, he talks about that the circuitry for, the same part of our brain that really likes shopping, people who have shopping addiction, it's the exact same circuit is self-help. I'm gonna be better.
Mm.
If only I buy this thing, then I'll be happy. If only I get more spiritual or get this next certificate, then I'm gonna be at peace. And I'm like, "Oh my
Yep.
god, it's the same thing," and that's why it's such a big market. Interest
Yeah. I mean, spiritual materialism, the materialism of it, it's like we're shopping around, we're consumers of this. We think, if I just get this, it'll make me a better person. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
so much overlap. I didn't That's kind of interesting to hear even on a neurological level, same
yeah,
brain regions.
yeah, yeah, same
Yeah.
brain region, absolutely. So, really, I mean, from, like, the Buddhist perspective, it's like we're all have this hungry ghost. We all are on this
Yeah.
spectrum.
Yeah.
We're all on it. So, like, to say that you over there and you over there, it's really not fair. It's like really bringing it back to be like, what part do I have in this? How does this show up for
Yeah.
me? What does my hungry ghost look like? And I'll always have a piece
Yeah.
of it. It's alive and well. It shape shifts and it
Yeah.
looks in other ways. And I think the biggest thing to do is that I check in with it and I really try to keep my bubble thin. I
Mm.
people around me that
Mm.
I hope call me on my bullshit. I try to have good, sangha around me to be like, "Am I full of shit right now?" Because this is what my brain is telling me. Uh,
Yeah.
and keep a
I love that.
worry practice of like, I need to check
Yeah.
myself. I know that I have very slippery tendencies.
I
You
love that.
Go ahead.
Keeping your bubble thin, like, "I keep my bubble thin," is such a beautiful mantra almost. It's
Mhm.
like, how can I make sure that I'm not just isolating in my own paradigm of,
Mhm.
my own bullshit and self-sabotage, but how do I listen to the voices of wisdom coming in around me?
Yeah.
Um, and surrounding yourself with people that will call you out on your bullshit from a place of love.
Yeah.
Like having a sangha or having a coach or a therapist. Sometimes friends can do it, but it's hard for friends to kind of,
Mhm.
risk the relationship and call you out. Some friends are great and they really have the courage to go there. But personally, I find that's where like having a sangha or a coach or a therapist is really helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. This is something actually I wanted to ask at the very beginning, but I'm just remembering now. It's just a very basic question. What is addiction? Like, how do you define it? Because I know, as you said, now it's kind of, we're
Mhm.
more aware of it. Like, oh yeah, phone addiction. But I'm always curious to know how different people define it.
I think I would define it as, a behavior. It's a compulsive behavior. It's something that we're doing that we don't want to be doing. It's something
Hmm.
there's consequences to it and we don't want
Hmm.
to do it. And we do it even though we say we're not going to. So there's some component of that.
Yeah. So there's consequences, and then we do it even though kind of like we don't want to do it.
Yeah.
We feel compelled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there's a,
Yeah.
yeah, I can, because I think some people are like, oh, I'm addicted to this or I'm addicted to that. But it's like, you really like that thing. Like, but are you having
Yeah.
adverse consequences and are you doing it even though you don't want to do it? Not like, there's a difference between, ice cream addict or are you really an ice cream addict? Are you really like binging on the ice cream even though you said you're not going to? Or do you just like ice cream and you have it a lot, but you say, I want to have ice cream?
So let me throw a curveball question at you. Let's say someone doesn't have an awareness of the consequences. Let's say somebody's addicted to video games
Mhm,
and they say, no, I love playing video games for 12 hours a day. Like, yeah, I
mhm,
want to do this. And
mhm,
it's having horrible negative consequences on their relationships, their
mhm.
life, their physical health, their mental health. But they don't have the awareness that they don't might not see the connection. Um, I'm just curious, like, because to me that still falls under the category of addiction, but there's not necessarily awareness. I'm just curious your take on that.
Well, I think that they'd be in their bubble. And I think that you
Yeah.
don't have to be able to admit that you have an addiction to have an addiction. I was an addict for a really long time, but I wouldn't tell you that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that um, I didn't need to self-disclose that in that case. Now I'm really big for self-disclosure. I want people to call themselves what they wanna call themselves, but in this conversation, if there was obvious negative consequences,
Yeah.
for me, in and out of hospitals, in and out of jails, in and out of rehabs, and I'm like, "I'm fine. Okay,
Yeah.
then." It's like, "No, no, you're not." But I think that that's where often we have a big problem. So I was just a special case to where the whole life behind me was blowing up in smoke, and I was still like, "Oh, I'm good." So I actually think eventually I came aware of that, and I'm like, "Okay, okay." Like, I've just blown up my world. Okay. But, so many people with a phone, people with maybe
Mhm.
work, people with, people who are not, maybe that are drinking, that are having negative consequences, but it doesn't look like a fucking time bomb.
Mhm.
I have
Mhm.
so much props for people who can say, "This isn't working for me," and stop
Mhm.
without having it the whole life having to blow up. And I think it's really
Yeah.
hard because I can promise this, that I would have never quit drinking had I not had to.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
would have. So, I think that so many people don't know that there's
Yeah.
negative consequences, and they don't know because we call addiction this one thing. We don't call it, these other things. I don't wanna be
Yeah.
an addict, or I don't like that word because that's for these people who live under the bridge, and it's like, I almost feel like we need to, like, reclaim this word.
Totally. It's one of my biggest pet peeves that there are people in this industry that are like, "Oh, you can't be addicted to porn." And I'm like, are you insane?"
I
They're
didn't
they're they're like, "Oh, it has to be a substance and you have to have these kind of withdrawal symptoms." And there's just this such a clinical they hide behind this barrier of like, "Oh, there has to be this very clinical definition." And it's like, no, it's like addiction is when we're doing things that are harming us and we keep doing it despite those consequences.
And
Um,
withdrawal can also look different, though. Withdrawal doesn't need to look like, a physical withdrawal, but I bet that you have anxiety. I bet that there's things that
oh
happen
yeah.
when you're not getting the fix that you need, regardless
Yeah.
what it is, of whether I'm, like, twitching to, like, answer my email or something, or, whatever it is. Like, there are adverse consequences.
Yeah.
Wouldn't continue to do it because so often, I think Abramante says this, I won't say it as eloquent as he does, is that so often we're not trying to get high, is that we're just trying to stave off the pain of withdrawal,
Mhm.
and that is
Mhm.
not just for substance. I just don't wanna feel like this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I love what you said also about like props to the people who aren't like in the depths of a dark hole addiction,
Mhm.
but they're like, "Hey, this isn't supporting my life." Because it's like rock bottom is a great launching pad for recovery. Like when you hit rock bottom, that's a great launching pad. But
Mhm.
it's so much easier to not wait until you hit rock bottom. Like if you can really get that awareness and start your recovery before you get to rock bottom, you have so many more resources um,
Absolutely.
to build that recovery off of. But it's difficult
And it's
because,
hard
yeah,
because also people are like, "Oh, what are you talking about? You don't have a problem. Oh, it's just weed. Oh, you're just,"
yeah,
like all of that in the culture. Like we don't culturally support people doing something off of the norm. And yeah, and I'm just so happy for, I know the substance recovery movement in the States is becoming like cool. Like there's like all of these non-alcoholic drinks. Like I just can't even imagine. Like I've always drank my kombucha from wine glasses, like for the last 10 years.
uh-huh,
I'm about 10 years sober. So I'm like kind of way back before. Now, kombucha is like $3 a bottle, but you buy non-alcoholic sparkling drink or whatever, and it's like, $12. Again, we're gonna turn this into a market, but anyway, props. It's there. It's good. Like, drink your fancy drink, do your thing, drink it out of a wine glass.
yeah.
And it's cool.
It does actually feel like there's a shift in our society where all of these aspects of recovery, like not drinking alcohol, like breaking free from porn, like self-awareness in general and doing things that are healthy and supportive is becoming cool, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
it's like you can actually find your community and get resources and it's actually a cool thing.
So good. It's so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd want my audience to hear? Anybody listening to this, any last words for people?
Mm. Yeah, I think just stay curious, really. I think that curiosity is it's really such a superpower in any situation. I'm trying to figure out some way to get a tattoo that not a cat, not I don't want it to say curious. I'm trying to find some cool symbol for curiosity that in any situation where I'm feeling stuck, if I could be curious, even just a little bit beyond shaming or blaming or judging or whatever, like, life would be so much easier if I could like deploy curiosity. Um, like, so practice curiosity. Oh, eventually it becomes more reflexive. I'm still waiting for this to be like in all the situations, but it's not. But every time in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, damn, if I just would have asked a question rather than like did that thing.
Mm,
But just to stay curious,
mm,
especially now that we know that it also is supporting the nervous system, curiosity. It's like a bottom up, top down cure. Like,
mm-hmm,
get it,
mm-hmm.
wonder. I wonder. Isn't it interesting? Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, that was a phenomenal conversation. I learned a lot. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story,
Mm,
the ups and the downs.
yeah.
And I know that it's going to be helpful for a lot of the listeners of this podcast.
Awesome.
Um,
Great to you.
so last question is where can people find you? Like, where would you want people to get in touch with you if they're curious to know about your
Mm,
amazing yoga classes on YouTube that you post millions and millions of yoga videos on? But just tell people more where they can find out about you.
yeah, you can find me. Cole Chance is my name, Cole Chance Yoga. And that is like my Instagram, my YouTube channel, my website, and I run yoga teacher trainings. I run an incredible, my favorite recovery program called Emerge, and that has people in for just all kinds of things. It's not just substance; it's really a human inquiry, curiosity program, and it's deep and wide, and it's brilliant. But you can find all of that at just colechanceyoga.com. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And when is the
all there.
next Emerge coming out?
I'm not sure. I'm considering
Okay.
September, October, and if not, also considering maybe doing one over the holidays, like doing a December and January. It's an 8-week course. Just 'cause I think that could
Yeah.
actually be supportive for people.
Yeah.
So
Well,
one of
either
those
way,
2 days.
if you're listening to this, go check out Emerge because it really is a beautiful program that you're putting
Yeah,
together.
all the info's up there about
So
it, so
thank you so much, Cole. It's really been a
no,
pleasure. And yeah, maybe I'll see you in Bali or Thailand sometime soon.
sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you on the next episode.